Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for session 4 of the MDTP webinar series. Because we're not able to come visit you in your school sites, we decided to bring in the staff of MDTP team from the state of California to you via webinar. So today we will be hosted by Carol Treglio. So I'm going to introduce the panel. And myself. So first of all, I'm Kimberly Samaniego. Again, welcome for coming. I'm the director of MDTP. And joining us today is Carol Treglio, who's going to be your presenter today. Carol is the outreach facilitator at the UC San Diego region. So we have 4 MDTPs in CSUs across the state and 4 in UCs. We also have Pat King here, who is the outreach facilitator for UC Davis. And with her is Julie Mustard, and Julie is the site coordinator for UC Davis. So they support the teachers and educators in Northern California area. And we have Emiliano Gomez from the UC Berkeley office. He's our site director and a faculty member at UC Berkeley.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Emiliano. Emiliano works with the educators, math educators in the Bay Area and surrounding regions. And so we're here for question and answers. Carol's going to present about a 30-minute session, and at the end we'll have time for questions and answers. If you would introduce yourselves in the chat while we're getting ready to start. Just you can put your name where you teach and what you teach. This kind of helps us guide thinking about questions. Additionally, just a little brief background about MDTP. We are grant funded. An umbrella program from the CSU and the University of California. So CAP, California Academic Partnership Program, funds us to provide MDTP resources, workshops, trainings, everything that we have free of charge to California teachers. So again, thank you for being here. And I'm going to send it over to Carol. So Carol, there you go.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to talk about thinking about the results, but really thinking about those re-engagement strategies. So why do we re-engage, and thinking about how we do it. But first of all, taking a look at maybe some data to give us some information first. I'm a former math teacher. I taught in San Diego Unified for many years, and then went on to the district office and then county office. So I've done a lot of different things, but my first love, of course, was teaching. And I used MDTP as a teacher, although I didn't use the online platform because it wasn't available at that point. So anyway, so today, I know that you're in a strange environment. You have students that you don't know, and all their pictures on the screen, and that's about it. And you may have some, hopefully you can have some discussions with them, but it's really fairly limited. It's not the same as being in the classroom. So really understanding where the kids are coming from. They've had, since March to September or to August, they really have had little to no instruction. So knowing where they are to begin with is very, very helpful. So today we're going to, as I said, we're going to briefly take a look at the data analysis piece. I did that last week, and that's on webinar 3, and it will be online soon if you happen to miss it. I'm going to talk about re-engagement and why we do re-engagement. And then we're going to talk about tasks that you can use to re-engage students. And I have just a number here, and I know that you probably know more. So basically, it's a 3-pronged approach. You basically, first of all, identify, we're looking for that snapshot right now of where students are. So the current reality. What are they understanding? What are their strengths? What are their gaps, misconceptions, unfinished learning? We don't know until we begin to really dig into the data. We then analyze the data, unpack it to take a look at where students, where they first learned this information and how it fits in with this year's curriculum. And then we're going to then enact strategies, and that's really the heart of what we're doing today, the enacting strategies and design learning experiences to support those learning goals. So in identifying, we really looked at the common errors, the misconceptions, unfinished learning, and gaps. And we can we'll look at these in the different pieces, but the strengths are really important. It's really important to know what your students already know. Even if they have something incorrect in a problem, they have a strength. They do know something. So building on that, the strength, in order to then work with those misconceptions. So we build on and enrich. So the common error, so what is the nature of the error? Did they have an error in, let's say, a sign error, or is it truly a misconception? Is it carrying out a procedure? Is it a true misconception? Is it incomplete processing? Did they start the problem correctly and just not finish it? So we need to really kind of take a look at the commonalities. And we can take a look at the distractor data to figure out, or at least somewhat figure out, what they've done. Do the results indicate a gap of content or unfinished learning? So this is that identification process, which we did a lot last week. And then we need to understand, okay, so since we know where they are, how does that impact the learning for this year? Okay, so if we take a look at this is called the item analysis guide, and we took a look at this last week and really dealt with it closely. We see that we can determine the strengths by looking at the item analysis, and it's fairly obvious that it would be the items where most of the students chose the correct solution. So the first place to really look at your data would be the item analysis. And again, I won't go into that this week because we spent a lot of time last week, and with a half hour, I don't have the time. We can take a look at unfinished learning and gaps. And so if it's unfinished learning, all the options, they seem to not know. They know something, but they think they have an understanding of the problem, but they really don't know beyond that. So their options are all over the map. And if you have a high rate of students omitting the problem, then it's a gap. But then when we take a look at the misconceptions, and you really get the misconceptions by looking at the distractor data. So we will start here today, taking a look at a couple of examples, thinking about it, but then realistically thinking about what do we do about it. I don't know why that happened. Okay, so anyway, okay, I clicked that one wrong. Unpack, okay, so then that analyzing piece is that unpacking. Where did the students first learn it? Why is this concept important to the concepts of this year? What is the misunderstanding? What are the implications for future courses? So for example, if students have a problem with, let's say, multiplying fraction or dividing fractions, they flip and multiply, but they don't know what they're flipping and multiplying, or they just multiply through it. So they really don't have an understanding of why and how to divide fractions. When they get to rational expressions, they're going to have an additional problem. So correcting this early on is a good thing. So today what we're looking at, basically we're looking at students that may have been in first year of algebra or integrated 1. So that was the assessment that I'm looking at. But it could be any one of the assessments that dealt with fractions, because we see the same errors happening, whether it's in 6th grade, 7th grade, or calculus. So if we take a look at one of the problems, let me go back to that slide. Something's going on with my slides again. The fractions, if we were to take a look at fractions and we wanted to really analyze and really do a thorough analysis of items in a particular topic, you don't want to take all the topics at once, and you only want to take those items that pertain to a particular unit that you're working with. So if we take a look at the item number, what are the strengths? So what do the students know? Even if students are not all getting it correct, what are the strengths? Some of the students are getting that correct. What are their strengths? Thinking about the misconceptions. What is that misconception? What is it that they're misunderstanding? And then again, how does that impact the learning? So what are the instructional responses that you're going to deal with? Thinking about again, unfinished learning. So as a class, they're kind of all over the map with what they've selected. And so again, thinking about what concepts did they seem to miss? So thinking about it, maybe several of them within that particular problem that they have that particular skill is weak on. And so you want to note that. And then again, thinking about what are you going to do about it? And then same thing as for gaps. For gaps, they really don't know enough to even enter the problem. So therefore there really is that unfinished learning. Unfinished learning and potential gaps are in a really kind of similar in that respect, where you have to do more intervention than you do maybe with a misconception. So here we have, this is my favorite, one of my favorite problems, good old Evans nuts. Okay, so let's look at Evans nuts. Well, what we know is that 23% of the students, and this was a integrated one class that took this. And so when they took this, it was at the beginning of the year, and taking a look at 23% of the students selected the correct response. 3% didn't, omitted it, so that's not really a high percentage. So we really, it isn't necessarily a gap. So we have a strength. The 23% of the students that did get it correct have a strength. If we take a look at the rest of the distractors, if we take a look at B, where 31% of the students selected it, let's take a look at what they possibly did. I would conjecture that they added all the whole numbers together. And then when they added the fractions together, they used something that I've seen over and over again, where they add the numerators over the sum of the denominators. The sum of the numerators are the sum of the denominators, and that would give us 4 and 14/17. So they know to add the fraction, they know to add, they know that they're going to add the whole numbers, and they're going to add the fractions. But again, it's that there's a little misconception in the fact that when you're adding, you can only add fractions if they have a common denominator. So that is the misconception that we need to work on here. If we take a look at at some of the rest of these, they may have partially added, but not completely added. One of the nice things when you're looking at your own data, if you've given the test, you can click on any one of the distractors and find out what that possible error might be. Okay, so this is one of the errors that we want to think about. Then this is the group, and we're going to be doing a unit where there are a lot of fractions and mixed numbers, etc. Because this is that first year of integrated one. And so we want to make sure that they have that real good foundation, but then continuing on into the course. So that's one piece that we'll take a look at. Here's another one that's very similar to it. It's adding fractions and decimals. This is the same group of students. 34% of the class did get a correct solution. 31% selected 11 ninths. And then we had 11 20ths. So if we were to change the 6/10, the 6/10 to 3/5, so 1 and 3/5. And if we, again, thinking about those denominators, if we add the sum of the denominators again, and we add the numerators together, that's going to lead you to C. So that's a common misconception that happened in 2 of the problems. So that tells us that we're going to have to concentrate on that particular content. So thinking about your data, you have your data. Now, what are we going to do about it? Well, according to NCTM, it's important to identify and address the potential gaps and misconceptions. That's key. When it matters most to students. So it matters most when they're going to be using it, and making sure that those underlying concepts or those prerequisites are solid so that they can access the current curriculum. And well, in some cases, in this particular case, they have already, some faulty reasoning has happened. So we've got to think about what we're going to do about it. And this comes from Sousa, who, really good book on how the brain learns mathematics. He basically says if a learner practices a skill incorrectly, then unlearning and relearning that skill correctly is extremely difficult. And we know that. We know that unlearning and relearning something is hard. It could be anything, and it's a difficult piece. So they have to really practice that new method of doing things, and it's going to feel awkward to them at first. And the degree of success is dependent on the age of the learner. So if we take that particular misconception and think about it now, then they will not maybe and do something about it. They will not then have it when they get to calculus in the first year of college. So here we're in a situation, and you're in the situation, well, do we just stop and do a unit on fractions? So we know from probably past experience, and we'll take a look at the data as well, we know that students have trouble with adding fractions as well as multiplying and dividing fractions. That's pretty much a given. So do we stop what we're doing and reteach it? So we would then teach the same unit again, address the same concept of missed basic skills, do the same types of problems, give them more practice, learn procedure, focus mostly on underachievers, well, or just learning the procedures and just giving them procedure again. And I would argue that if you give them a procedure again, in 6 months, you're going to have to give it to them again. And the cognitive load is usually lower. But this year, of all years, you definitely do not have time to reteach anything. Not that you ever do, but this year is crucial because not only do you have a short period of time to work with students, you have a shortened period because they've missed a bunch. And if you're teaching asynchronously or asynchronously, or a combination of the two, which most people are, then they have maybe half the time with you. So you have far less time to think about reteaching. What we really want to do is re-engage. So we want to think about, revisit the student thinking. So what were they thinking? We want to address those conceptual understandings. We want to think about tasks in a different way and different perspectives. We want to think about maybe critiquing approaches or making connections. And then this engages the entire class, and you can engage the entire class in the mathematics. And the cognitive load is higher because you're asking them why things work and how they work. So we definitely want to re-engage. And we want to distribute the practice over time. So when you learn by brain research again, from Souza, if you learn something for the first time, in the first 10 minutes, say, and you practice it a few times, well, you know it. Then you go home, and maybe a day later, you come back and you remember part of it. So there's about a little bit of retention. If you, a week later, you take a look at that again, and so then there is a little bit more retention, but still not as good as the first 10 minutes. Because again, you're going to need to continue to practice over time. So cycling that information over time is key. So doing spiral reviews, spiraling problems on homework, spiraling them on warm-ups. I used to do that all the time. Also giving spiral items on tests to keep them thinking about it. They have then the retention of that concept. So we know that learning and relearning, as I said, is a challenge to plan, and it takes time. So again, that whole piece of little bit over time. Incorporating multiple representations, so doing things a lot of different ways. Incorporating productive discourse, so students talking to each other. And I know that in this world, in the virtual world, if they're put into rooms, they can at least do that in relatively small groups. If you have I don't know how large the classes are, but you could put them into groups of maybe 6 or 7, and have them talk for a few minutes and then come back to the whole group. You can do that kind of thing. It's not necessarily just a snap. It's not easy to do, but you can do that. But students have to be part of the process. So giving them just worksheets will not do it. And we need to link. We need to make sure that we link that past piece and bring it into this year's concept. So making sure that we bridge into the concepts of this year. And then it gaps themselves, because that means that it's really, they have not learned it at all, needs new and different and creative approaches. And we want to think about one particular gap at a time. I don't know what's going on here. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so thinking about your re-engagement. Okay, so re-engagement could be any one of these pieces. It could be parallel problems. We'll talk a little bit about what parallel problems are, and I'll basically tell you what I was thinking when I created some of these. Which one doesn't belong on that? There are several different websites that have examples of that, and I'll show you a couple. Compare and contrast solutions, doing some error analysis. This is a really good way to re-engage. Number talks. I know that some people think that number talks are specifically for elementary and maybe middle, but I was a high school teacher and I used number talks. Written response items. This is an MDTP item that I will show you later on, time permitting. And then modules. These were created specifically for entering college students who didn't quite meet the minimum standard and needed to review some of the high school curriculum so that they would be ready for that first year of math. Okay, so as we re-engage, we want to consider the unit you're about to teach. So You want to think specifically about what are you teaching next? And what are the prerequisite skills that you need for students to be successful in that unit? And then thinking about the topics on the test itself that address that particular topic. And thinking about then looking at that item and what are those prerequisite knowledge and skills that are addressed in that topic and in those particular problems in that topic. And then consider the questions in the distractor analysis. So thinking about what concepts were misunderstood, a misconception, but I also want you to think about the strengths because that's really important too. And then thinking about how you're going to bridge. So I did a little research on parallel problems because I had an idea of myself, but I wanted to see what some of the other experts had to say. So I looked at NCTM and I saw a couple of different speakers give talks about parallel problems. And so when you're thinking about creating a parallel task for your lesson, thinking again about that big idea you want to focus on and think about what students might need. Okay, so I think we've talked a little bit about what we're thinking about. If there are two or more tests that focus on the same big idea at different development levels, but which are quite similar. So you may want to do more than one parallel problem in order to meet the need. And then these are designed to suit the needs of different students, but so that the whole range of students can participate in the discussion. So let's take a look at what we mean by a parallel problem. This was Evans nuts. We talked a little bit about that. And so then I created a problem very similar to Evans nuts. So I have Jerome and he has walnuts, cashews, and craisins. And so then the first question ask of them is, what do you know and what do you wonder? Right? So give them a few minutes to think about that and produce something. And so he wishes to make 7 pounds of the mixture. And the question then is, well, does he have enough of each in order to have 7 pounds worth of the mixture? Okay, so again, thinking about what you might want, what needs to happen. And then this part, Joseph is your partner. And he says that Jerome only has 6 5/13 pounds of mixed nuts and fruit. So he doesn't have enough. And the question then is, how do you respond to Joseph? All right, take a look for a second at the error that Joseph made. How does that relate to the problem that just thinking about that. If we take a look at it, here again, Joseph added the whole numbers and then he added the fractions, which is, so he knows to do that. But again, the mistake he made was that it was the sum, he found the sum of the numerators over the sum of the denominators. So thinking about how do you respond to Joseph? How do you fix that? So that's an error analysis, but it's also a parallel problem. So in this particular question, we added decimals and fractions. And so here's a problem. And basically it's who is correct and why. So let's just take a look for a second at these 3 possibilities. Jan says, well, I'm going to convert 1 8/10 to a mixed number and then add the fractions. And then reducing, I end up with 1 3/4. Vernon says, well, he's going to convert 2/3 to 0.6 and then add the decimals and then convert to a mixed number. And then Dante says he converted and then simplifies. We want to take a look at who is correct and why. Again, thinking about that error analysis. Again, really honing in on that one particular error that the students were making. There's also another type of error here with Vernon, converting the 2/3 to 6/10. All right. So there's more of a conversation about why this might be incorrect and why this is incorrect. Okay, number talks, again, are really important. I always think about number talks, especially with dealing with, well, I did it with thinking about multiplying binomials together or polynomials and thinking about multiplication of 2 and 3-digit numbers. And I would typically do that before I started with multiplying polynomials. Or in multiplying and dividing rational expressions, I would typically do something with the arithmetic, have them do an arithmetic problem, explain what they were doing before we got into, or before it led into the rational expressions. So it's really a 5 to 10 minute discussion around purposefully crafted problems that are solved mentally. And it really, the mathematics is really easy. It has to be something that can be done mentally.
Hi, Carol. It's 3:32.
Oh, okay. And I'm just talking away here. Okay. So thank you. All right. So the numbers are friendly. Students talk, and there's a whole group discussion about how you got that answer. And solutions can be found using multiple strategies and methods. And then all things are posted, and then you compare and contrast methods. And that brings in a really rich discussion. So for example, prior to this, where we're dividing rational expressions, as I said, I would do a problem like this. And then this is another type of problem that you could consider, comparing rational expressions for which is larger. Again, this relates to a problem, but we didn't really look at this problem, which is this one. And I'll just quickly go through that because okay, so which one doesn't belong? Okay, so this is one of the things I would start with which one doesn't belong. And they're really interesting to talk about, but they're also interesting to write. So in this one, I found this on the internet, and it's basically, and I would start with something simple like this with students figuring out, well, it could be any one of those, and there's a discussion about every one of the 4, which is very cool. So then you get into some math and thinking about why or how these are different. Which one is different? Well, they're all different in their own way. And so any one of them, and this again leads to a huge amount of discussion, a huge amount of vocabulary comes out because you're talking about denominators, you're talking about multiples, you're talking about lots of different things. We're talking about improper fractions, we're talking about more complex fractions because it's a decimal within a fraction. So there are lots of different things that you can talk about within the context of which one doesn't belong. There's a plethora of them on this website. And actually then I created this one because again, we think about which one doesn't belong. It's again, kind of elementary or maybe middle school, but it really doesn't apply to high school. And I think the written response items, I'll just talk briefly about them. Webinar 5, which will be October 21st and 22nd, I believe. They're going to talk about the written response items, where you can get a little bit deeper into the understanding of where the students may have gone wrong. So here is something where they're ordering from least to greatest. They're comparing values. So again, that comparison, etc. So there's really a lot of information and also the learning modules. If you go into rational, it starts with very simplistic in module 1 and then gets more complex up through the algebra 2. And some references, resources, written response items are great. Noticing and wonderings. This is really good too if you're an NCTM member, but if you're not, you don't have access to it, unfortunately. Which one doesn't belong? Great. Visual patterns is another one that's really good. Math assessment project in particular deals with re-engagement problems. Illustrative mathematics, the same thing. U cubed has a lot of them. And then you can actually, on Desmos, there are lots of really good items that you can re-engage students in. So this is the website. I want to spend a little bit of time for questions and answers, and we can go back to this if there are none, but I would like to move on to questions and answers. And this is my email address. This is Pat's. If you want to contact, I don't know where all of you are from. I didn't look in the chat yet. So I don't know where you're all from, but from San Diego, if you need some help, or if you want some professional development around something like this, where it's specific to your particular class or school, we can do that. In San Diego, I can do that. Pat can do that as well. We have also other folks that are with us today that could do it. Emilio is here from UC Berkeley. He goes out and helps folks. And there are a lot, so you can go online and take a look at find the person or persons in your area that you can contact. So, questions?
One question came up in the chat, Carol,
Yes.
and that question was, who can have access to the learning modules? And you mentioned that they are good for getting ready for college, but would they also be appropriate for high school students?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're actually in the very beginning, actually in the, you can start actually in middle school. And they're the first module in many of the content. If you would like, I'll go back and go into that. Would somebody like for me to do that?
Actually, I'll just share that Kim shared a link so that they can find those modules.
Okay,
correct. That's correct. And just to kind of give a little bit more insight, we used readiness data for students entering into a pre-calculus, or actually into a summer bridge program at UC San Diego. So these are exiting 12th grade students coming into a ninth grade, to a freshman entry-level program at UC San Diego, and we gave them the math analysis readiness exam. We used the results from that exam to really focus on misconceptions and unfinished learning. We did not focus on gaps. So something where students indicated they had not seen before, we decided that learning modules was not a great place to re-engage students. The learning modules are all designed with the expectation that the students would build conceptual understanding through really some really great tasks. And there's Explore, as Carol said, there's Explore, there's What Do You Notice and Wonder, there's videos from LearnZillion and some other places that try to bring a couple different points of view into a problem to build a concept. So we also looked at like Carol had talked about, unpacking the data. So if we noticed that students were having a problem with adding fractions, we went back to 7th grade, 6th grade standards, and we started there, but we bridged back, the modules bridge all the way back to pre-calculus readiness. So it goes to rational functions, graphing with asymptotes, simplifying rational expressions. So our modules start where the misconceptions started and bridge back to where that the students need to go. So they are great for high school students. I think they're very good activity. They're student-centered also. So you can just assign a module or a lesson for your students to do. They're meant to be done on their own. I talked a lot. I could talk a lot about those.
Yeah, me too.
We have, Carol authored quite a few of those. I authored, I think, 1 or 2 lessons. So we used work group members to author lessons on those modules. So we're pretty proud of them. We're still working, they're evolving, ever adding new content, finding things that maybe we need to go deeper in. So if you put eyes on it and you want to give us feedback, we'd love to hear that.
Absolutely, yes.
Carol, someone is asking if you could please share the slide with the resources again.
Oh, absolutely.
And I did put a few things in the chat. I put in the written response items, so you don't have to go to our website to request, since we've already vetted you as educators. I gave you that link. If you bookmark it, then you can have access to all of those written response items. Carol did tell you we are going to be running sessions 6 and 7 in later in October on using MDTP to learn about what are students thinking, and some strategies on how to use them to engage students in basically in re-engagement learning for retention, building retention.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any other questions?
A question just came up about session 5.
Session 5 will be the written response item, and that will be
timing.
It's gosh, I don't want to put it off the top of my head, but it's in October, Wednesday, Thursday in October 20th,
21st,
22nd.
and then the next. Oh, hi, Terry's here.
Hi, I
Terry
did.
popped
I'm
in.
sorry.
So, Terry is here. She is our UCLA outreach facilitator, and Terry and I will be presenting those. Terry, give the dates, please.
October 21st and 22nd, and 28th and 29th.
Right.
We're going to be doing the same things, but offering them for 2 weeks, just to see if we offer more times, if you guys can join us.
1 week it'll be 3 o'clock, and 1 week it'll be 4 o'clock.
That's correct.
Yeah.
We're doing the flyer on those now, so you'll probably get those pretty soon sent to you from my office.
We haven't done one on modules, and so that might be something you think about down the line, but yeah, we haven't done those.
I see another question in the chat.
Okay.
So a question is, how is confidentiality of tests handled during COVID? So I'm going to assume that you're meaning you're proctoring a readiness test to your students while they're at home. And so I'm hoping that's, I think that's what the question is. And we are putting it on the educators to work with their students to build a culture of trust in the classroom before you actually give the assessment. So anytime you want the students to take an assessment seriously, to give you good data, but they also need to know why you're doing it. So the important part about confidentiality of this is to let students know that it is a formative assessment. It is used to help them access the content in your class. It's helping you and helping them. So when you put that to students in that manner, they're going to be looking at it in a way that benefits them, and they're going to be a little bit less likely to want to share the test results, which is why we ask you to proctor it. It is online. We are not offering paper tests for students at home. So we do know that anytime that students from around the state are accessing the test, that the confidentiality is in the hands of the educator. I don't need that. Thank you.
Cool.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So how honest the test is, that's a question. So
How honest is the test?
So the
What do you
question
think?
I think they're saying is how can we say that the results are valid? Like again, that is, it's really the results are going to be based on the communication between the educator and the student as to the purpose of the test. So if you're indicating to the student that you want to use this data to help you with your instruction, which is what I do when I teach math and I use MDTP. I just finished teaching an 8-week summer bridge program at UC San Diego for students entering into our campus, and it was a remote class. But we did MDTP 3 times. So I did it the first time, same test twice, at the beginning of the class, and then it's an 8-week class. So after 5 weeks, because I wanted to see if I was, any of the interventions, any of the lessons that I was creating were helping to, narrow some of those gaps or intervene on any of the misconceptions. But the students knew the reason why I was using the test. It was not to place them. It was not to evaluate them. It was for us to have better learning experiences. So they took it with high integrity. So I think the more the students know what you're using it for, the better your results are going to be.
Anything else?
Emiliano, did you want to talk about the remote testing agreement?
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure if the question meant how do we know that the students are taking the test with integrity? And we did develop, we have a PDF that we can share. And I think it's you can get it also from MDTP's website. About it's basically a policy and an agreement for testing during these times of distance learning. And we have some recommendations about proctoring and things of that sort in that document. Copyright issues as well.
Okay. Anything else that we can help you with?
Another thing that's been added to your account as a teacher is a 2-minute animation that you can share with your students. And again, we would recommend that you do that before your students test. And in that 2-minute animation, it will give you a chance to explain to your students your expectations in terms of how should they prepare their workspace, copyright laws, what testing behaviors you expect of your students. And when you are getting ready to test your students, I think stating upfront why, as Kim mentioned, why you are giving them the test in the first place, that it's to help you as a teacher build from their learning, that helps students address that a little more carefully. You can find that video in your faculty account under the resources tab. And there are, when you click on classes, it will show up in the tutorial section. It's a little YouTube clip that you can share with your students.
Right.
Right.
Also, I added a survey in the chat. It just gives us some feedback about your thoughts on our webinar sessions. We use the feedback to design, new sessions and to revise ones that we've written. This webinar will be posted on our website, mdtp.ucsd.edu. This is now our 4th completed session, so we have the first 3 already on the website, and we'll be placing this on there probably later this week, if not early next week. So if you have any educator friends who you'd like to refer to that, we welcome you to do that too. So does anybody have any more?
And again, we're always willing to come out and help with anything, or not, well,
Remotely.
not virtually,
Virtually.
that is, and customize, or if questions that you might have, or if you want help with analyzing or what to do about what you see, we can certainly come out and help you with that.
So thank you for joining us today. And if you have questions, we'll hang around for a few more minutes. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day.
And don't forget to fill out the survey.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.